Snow came down early that year, not in flurries but in long, quiet sheets that covered the high plains without ceremony. By the first week of December, the land around Cottonwood Ranch had gone still, as though it were listening. Thomas Calder fell sick 3 days before the snow finished closing the roads. It started as a cough he ignored. A tightness in the chest he worked through. Men like Calder learned young that stopping was a luxury, and winter did not wait on weakness. But by the time the first fence post disappeared under white, he could no longer rise from his bed. The doctor from Red Bluff came once. He stayed less than an hour. He left herbs, warnings, and a look that said more than his words did. Fever. Lungs. Rest, if rest could be afforded. It could not. Calder had no family left on the ranch. The hands had ridden out weeks earlier to take winter work elsewhere. He had planned to manage alone until spring, as he always did. Now the house lay quiet except for his breathing and the ticking of the stove as it cooled. Outside, 40 horses waited. A ranch could survive a season without a man. Horses could not. Calder knew this even through the fever. He knew it in the way his mind returned, again and again, to the sound he did not hear. No stamping. No screaming. No panic carried on the wind. On the third night, delirious and shaking, he forced himself to the window. Moonlight lay pale across the yard. The barn stood dark. Yet the horses were calm, their shapes barely shifting. They should have been starving by then. By morning, the troughs were full. Hay was gone from the loft. Water had been broken through ice cleanly, not hacked. The work of someone who knew animals. Someone careful. Calder lay back down, unsure whether to feel relief or unease. Kindness, in that country, never came without a reason. Beyond the ranch, men were already taking note. Word traveled faster than weather on the frontier. By the time the second snowfall hit, Red Bluff knew. Thomas Calder was down. The buyers knew. The men who moved papers and fences without asking knew. A strong rancher sick before Christmas was not just a man in trouble. He was an opportunity. Calder did not know any of this yet. He drifted in and out of sleep, fever burning time away. All he knew was that each morning, the horses still lived. And someone, somewhere, was choosing to keep them that way. By the 5th day, Calder stopped wondering if the care was real. Fever can make a man doubt his own name, but it cannot make hay disappear cleanly from a loft or water rise through ice without leaving splintered scars. Someone was coming every night. Someone quiet enough to leave no sign meant to be found. They never came to the house. That was what troubled him most. If a neighbor had been doing it out of kindness, they would have knocked. They would have spoken his name through the door, checked his pulse, asked after his strength. That was how decent folk behaved, even in hard country. This was different. The work was done with purpose, not concern. The horses were fed just enough. The gates were checked, not repaired. Nothing extra. Nothing careless. As though the goal was not comfort, but survival. On the 6th night, Calder woke to the sound of wind shifting. He listened past his own breathing, past the creak of timber, and caught something else, soft, deliberate movement outside. Not hurried. Not sneaking. Simply precise. Boots, he realized. Stopping short of the porch. Whoever it was stood there for a long moment. Calder felt it like pressure in the room, a presence weighing the dark. He wanted to speak. Wanted to call out, to thank them if nothing else. His voice failed him. The steps turned away. By morning, the horses were restless but fed. One had a bandage tied clean around a foreleg, the knot done with practiced hands. Calder stared at it longer than he should have. That knot meant ranch work. It meant someone who had lived this life, not passed through it. Down the valley, Eliza Moore woke to the sound of men arguing outside her fence. They came in pairs now. Well-dressed coats. Ledgers tucked under arms. Smiles that did not reach their eyes. They called themselves buyers, said they represented progress, said the land would be better used in stronger hands. Eliza listened without interrupting. She had learned silence young. They told her Thomas Calder was sick. Might not last the winter. Told her the valley would change soon, and she could change with it or be buried beneath it. She watched their mouths move and thought of her brother, gone these many years. Thought of the way he used to tie knots that never slipped. That night, after the buyers rode off, she fed her boy and waited until the moon cleared the ridge. Then she wrapped herself in wool and walked toward Cottonwood Ranch. She did not go to the house. She did not want thanks. She went to the barn, broke ice, lifted hay, and worked as though time itself were watching. She did not know the reckoning had already begun. She only knew that some things, once neglected, never recover. And she knew the men who had come to her gate had chosen the wrong winter to believe no one was watching. The buyers returned 2 days later, riding harder this time. They no longer bothered with smiles. The ledgers stayed closed in their saddlebags, replaced by talk of law and notice. One of them wore a deputy's star that caught the light too easily, as though it had never earned its dullness. Eliza Moore listened from her porch while her son stood behind her, small hand gripping the seam of her coat. They spoke of taxes overdue. Of boundaries remeasured. Of winter being no time for a woman to stand alone. They spoke as though the land already belonged to them and she was merely slow to understand. When she refused, the man with the star leaned closer and lowered his voice. He told her about families farther south who had resisted. He told her where they were now. He did not raise his hand. He did not need to. They rode away confident, certain the silence would do their work for them. Across the valley, Calder's fever worsened. He drifted through dreams of hooves and open gates, of fences falling inward instead of out. In one moment of clarity, he realized what his illness truly meant. Not death. Absence. Men like the buyers thrived on absence. That afternoon, a ranch hand passing through stopped at the fence line. He did not ride in. He did not call out. He only looked, saw the smoke still rising thin from the chimney, and turned his horse away. By nightfall, the wind carried voices from Red Bluff. Talk moved faster than wagons. Someone mentioned Eliza Moore. Someone else mentioned Calder's land, his grazing rights, his water. An old trapper, half drunk and mostly ignored, spat into the fire and said a name no one liked to hear. He said it casually, as though naming a storm. The room went quiet. They said that name had once belonged to a man who rode with nothing to lose. That he had buried a brother under a crooked pine and never forgiven the land for allowing it. That he had a habit of appearing where systems grew comfortable. Someone laughed it off. Someone else paid their tab early. That night, the barn at Cottonwood Ranch stood open longer than usual. The horses were checked twice. One fence post was reset, not for repair, but for alignment. Eliza's brother did not speak. He rarely did anymore. He watched the valley the way a hunter watches water. He counted riders. He counted patterns. He understood, now, that this was no longer about one woman or one rancher. This was about a mechanism that fed itself on winter, sickness, and silence. And mechanisms, once seen clearly, could be broken. In Red Bluff, the buyers planned their next move. They would return with papers and witnesses. They would make an example before the new year. They did not realize the valley had already begun to shift. Some reckonings announced themselves with thunder. This one moved quietly, gathering weight, patient as the season itself. By the time Christmas Eve drew near, the valley carried a tension that had nothing to do with weather. Men felt it when they saddled their horses. Women felt it when they latched their doors at dusk. Even the animals moved differently, heads lifting at sounds that did not yet exist. The stories returned the way they always did, reluctantly, and too late. Old-timers remembered a winter years back when 3 ranches had been saved without anyone ever claiming credit. Fences cut clean. Papers burned. Men who had worn borrowed authority leaving town lighter than they arrived. No bodies were spoken of. Only absence. The names surfaced again, whispered now, never spoken straight. It was said the man did not hunt people. He hunted imbalance. That he did not arrive to win, only to end things that had gone too far. The buyers dismissed it. They met that afternoon in Red Bluff's back office, boots up on the desk, the star resting loose against a whiskey glass. They talked about Calder's illness like a timetable. They talked about Eliza Moore's land like it was already marked. They decided to act before Christmas morning. Before sympathy had time to gather. Before anyone could interfere. What they did not account for was that interference had already settled in. At Cottonwood Ranch, Calder woke clear-headed for the first time in days. The fever had not left, but it had loosened its grip enough for him to think. He noticed the barn door latched properly against the wind. The tracks swept away, not hidden, simply gone. He understood then that whoever was helping him did not want to be known. And that frightened him. Because men who refused recognition were rarely there for kindness alone. That night, Eliza's brother stood on the ridge above the road to her homestead. He watched the buyers' riders move below, counting 5. Enough to scare. Enough to take. He did not follow them immediately. He waited until they passed the cottonwoods, until the land narrowed and the creek bent. Tight. Places where horses could not spread and men had to move in line. The land remembered those places. It always did. When he finally rode, it was not toward them, but parallel. He was not there to protect one house. He was there to interrupt a system. By dawn, Red Bluff would be different. By Christmas night, the valley would know which stories were true. The buyers rode on, confident, unaware that the ground beneath them had already shifted from beneath their feet. And somewhere behind them, a man the land had not forgotten moved with the patience of something inevitable. The buyers did not arrive at Eliza Moore's place first. That was the mistake that sealed everything. They turned instead toward the low warehouse near Red Bluff's south edge, where freight wagons stopped and papers changed hands away from prying eyes. It was there the true work was done, not the threats, not the visits to lonely homesteads, but the quiet sorting of land, labor, and names. Eliza's land was only one piece. Inside the warehouse, lantern light spilled across crates marked for rail transfer. Ledgers lay open, their pages dense with figures that meant little to the untrained eye. To those who knew how to read them, they told a cleaner story than any gun ever could. Families displaced. Debts invented. Winter contracts that bound men to work until spring, then carried them farther south where no one asked questions. It was not theft. It was processing. The man watching from the dark understood that distinction well. He had once been part of it, briefly. Long enough to learn how systems hid behind procedure. Long enough to see how authority could be worn like clothing, removed when stained. That was why he fed the horses instead of knocking on Calder's door. Why he waited instead of warned. The machine needed to expose itself before it could be broken. When the buyers finished inside, they stepped out laughing, breath fogging in the cold. One spoke of Christmas whiskey. Another spoke of how easy the valley had become. They never saw him until the first lantern went dark. What followed was not chaos. It was correction. A wagon was shattered under a single placed blow. A horse was cut loose and sent running, scattering the rest. Papers vanished into flame, not hurried, not messy, burned until there was nothing left to reconstruct. One man tried to run. He made it 3 steps before he understood he would not be leaving. By the time the shouting stopped, the warehouse stood empty except for ash and overturned crates. No bodies lay in the street. No blood marked the snow. Only absence, and silence heavy enough to feel. At Cottonwood Ranch, Calder slept through it all. But when he woke near dawn, the wind carried a different sound. Not fear. Not hunger. Relief. He did not yet know why. The machine had been exposed. And now, it was breaking. Word reached the valley before the sun cleared the ridge. Not in detail. Not in names. Only in the way men spoke more carefully, and the way horses were turned back toward home without explanation. Something had happened in Red Bluff, and whatever it was had not favored those who moved by intimidation and borrowed authority. By midday, the deputy's star lay in the dirt behind the jail, trampled flat. No charge was filed. No warrant issued. The law, such as it was, chose not to see. The buyers did not return. Those who had worked under them quietly packed what they owned and rode out before nightfall. They did not look back. Systems collapse fastest when the small parts realize they will not be protected. That afternoon, Calder managed to sit up long enough to look out across his land. Snow still covered the fences, but the air felt lighter, as though something unseen had lifted. A neighbor finally rode in, hat in hand, cautious but relieved. He spoke carefully, as though the land itself might be listening. "They won't be troubling you," he said. "Nor Mrs. Moore." Calder nodded. He did not ask how. That night, the man who had fed the horses came one last time. He moved through the barn without hurry, running a hand along a familiar neck, tightening a latch that did not need tightening. He did not intend to stay. He never did. Calder watched from the window, wrapped in a blanket, strength still thin but his mind clear enough now to recognize the shape of the man below. Not a drifter. Not a ghost. A rancher, once. A brother. Calder opened the door and spoke, the word rough in his throat. "Thank you." The man paused. He did not turn around. "Keep your fences straight," he said quietly. "And don't let sickness make you disappear." Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark as cleanly as he had arrived. By morning, the valley had settled into a new order. Land remained with those who worked it. Silence returned to the roads. Fear did not. Fear was no longer needed. Some reckonings end with bodies. Others end with balance restored. This one ended with winter continuing, as it always had, unchanged, indifferent, and honest.